Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are strapping in for a journey back, way back to the Roaring '20s, Chicago 1924 specifically. We're revisiting a case that was instantly dubbed the crime of the century. And, it still kind of holds that title. What really jumps out from the sources is that its infamy isn't so much about the what kidnapping, murder, sadly common themes, but the who. The killers, their background, their sheer privilege and genius and this unbelievable arrogance behind it all.
Exactly. That's really the core of what we're diving into. The sources we have paint this picture of, yes, a meticulously planned crime, but also a huge cultural shock. I mean, you've got staggering wealth, this really bizarre, twisted philosophical reason behind it all. Our mission today is sort of to unpack how two incredibly brilliant, incredibly privileged young men thought they could pull off the perfect murder, and how one tiny detail just blew it all apart.
Okay, let's set the scene. It's Wednesday, May 21st, 1924. We're in Chicago's South Kenwood neighborhood, very wealthy area. The victim is 14-year-old Bobby Franks. His father, Jacob Franks, this guy wasn't just rich, he was Chicago elite. Made a fortune in banking, real estate, president of the Rockford Watch Company. We're talking, maybe over $70 million in today's money? A huge amount.
And that setting, the extreme wealth, it's absolutely central here. Bobby himself, he was a student at a very prestigious boys' school. Smart kid, considered the smartest in his grade, actually. On the debate team, a natural leader, seemed like a really kind boy.
So that afternoon, Bobby was supposed to come home after school. He'd been umpiring a baseball game. But 6 o'clock rolls around, still no Bobby. Jacob Franks gets home, talks to Flora, Bobby's mother. And his first reaction, honestly, irritation. Bobby sometimes lost track of time. Jacob figured, he's probably playing tennis or cards with his older cousin Richard. Richard lived nearby.
And South Kenwood itself, you really have to picture this. It wasn't just wealthy, it was one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the whole country. Huge mansions, full staff butlers, maids, drivers. It was supposed to be this bubble of safety, the absolute peak of security, the idea that a kid could just vanish from there. Unthinkable, really.
But that initial irritation, it turned to worry pretty fast. By 6:30, Jacob checks Richard's house. It's empty. He's getting desperate. Flora's insisting, no, Bobby should definitely have been home hours ago. So Jacob calls a friend, a powerful guy, a former state senator, to help search. They race over to the school. It's locked up tight. They actually find an open window, climb inside, frantic searching empty classrooms, just pure panic setting in.
They get back home, and the scene is just awful. Flora had collapsed, fainted. Turns out while Jacob was out, she'd gotten a phone call. A man's voice she didn't recognize. And the message was chillingly direct. Bobby's kidnapped. He's safe for now, but if they call the police, quote, something terrible would happen. Imagine hearing that. Going from annoyed about lateness to that.
Yeah.
Just horrifying.
What a terrible position to be in. You want the police, obviously, the full force of the law, but the threat, the risk to Bobby. The sources show they agonized over it. They ended up taking this really cautious approach. Using the state senator friend's influence, they contacted the police, but only the very top brass, and swore them to absolute total secrecy. The investigation had to start completely under wraps.
Right. No flashing lights, no public appeals, just quiet background work.
Okay, so let's move into part 2. This is where we see just how deep the killer's planning went. The next morning, Thursday, May 22nd, Jacob and Flora get the ransom letter. $10,000. Small, unmarked bills. Jacob gets the money ready immediately, no question. But the detectives, working in secret, are already finding these weird threads. They start uncovering these 2 fake identities the kidnappers created, Morton D. Ballard and Lewis Mason.
And the timeline here is fascinating. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment thing on the 21st. No. The sources show that 2 full weeks before the kidnapping, these guys were already setting things up, establishing those aliases, methodically.
It was incredibly meticulous. 2 weeks earlier, someone calling himself Morton books room 1031 at the Morrison Hotel, big place in Chicago, but he never actually stays there. A maid got suspicious because the room was always spotless, like untouched. She looked in a suitcase Morton left behind, no clothes, just random library books.
Which is such a strange detail, right? But it speaks volumes about their thinking. The room wasn't for sleeping. It was about building a believable front. The library books. Maybe just to make it seem occupied, given some life. But the key thing was the address. They used that hotel room as a mailing address, collected junk mail, other correspondence addressed to Morton D. Ballard and Lewis Mason.
And that mail became their quote-unquote proof of legal name and address. Think about that. With that flimsy proof, they managed to open a bank account. A fake one, obviously. And they used that documentation, plus the fake names, to rent a car, a nice one, a luxury Willis Knight touring car. They needed a whole fake documented life just for this one crime.
The sheer complexity of it all. It just screams that the money, the $10,000, was completely beside the point. It was never the real goal. The goal was the challenge itself, the intellectual game.
Wait, let me jump in there. If the money was truly irrelevant and these families were unbelievably wealthy, why bother with all that? The fake bank account, the rental agreements, the mailing address. Wouldn't just like a random anonymous act have been simpler if they just wanted to prove some philosophical point about being superior?
That's a great question, and I think the sources suggest the difficulty was a point. It wasn't about committing just any crime. It was about pulling off this complex, intellectually demanding feat. The ransom scheme, the fake identities, that was the ultimate test for them. Could they fool society completely? That's what would prove their superiority in their minds. The money was just the mechanism, proof of concept almost.
That actually makes the crime even more chilling. Okay, so let's get to the day itself, May 21st. Moulton is driving the rented Willis Knight. Louis is with him. They're cruising around South Kenwood. And they spot Bobby Franks walking home.
And Louis, well, he knew Bobby instantly. This is where it gets deeply personal and awful. Louis, who we now know was Richard Loeb, was Bobby's actual cousin. They played tennis together regularly. So Loeb pulls the car over, calls Bobby over like it's nothing. Hey, can I ask you about that tennis racket you use? Something like that. Bobby, naturally, recognizes his cousin, trusts him completely, gets right into the front seat. No hesitation.
The speed is just brutal. Bobby's apparently mid-sentence, talking about the racket. Loeb, who'd moved into the back seat somehow, suddenly lunges forward. With a chisel, a sharp chisel, starts hitting Bobby in the back of the head. Bobby screams. Loeb drags him into the back seat, shoves a rag down his throat, clamps a hand over his mouth, holds it there until he stops moving.
And the detail that always gets me from the reports, Morton, Nathan Leopold, just kept driving, didn't stop the car, didn't react visibly. For him, for both of them apparently, this wasn't emotional. It was just, as the sources put it, business as usual, a task completed, pure clinical detachment.
And the coldness just continues. They drive south towards Indiana. Bobby's body is just lying there, totally exposed on the floor in the back of this fancy rental car. Then they stop at a roadside diner. And according to the accounts, they calmly get out, eat hot dogs and root beers, and then get back in the car and keep going, just having a snack after that. The sheer normality of it is staggering.
It really is. It's where any pretense of, high-minded philosophy just evaporates, doesn't it? You're left with something deeply, deeply disturbing. They drive to this remote wooded area in Indiana, a place Morton Leopold knew well from bird watching. They pull Bobby's body out, confirm he's dead, strip off all his clothes. They roll him up in some kind of rug or blanket they had, and they force his body into a drainage culvert, a pipe running under some railroad tracks in a swampy, marshy area.
Then they drive back to Chicago. First stop, burn Bobby's clothes. Get rid of that evidence. Then they meticulously clean the inside of the Willis Knight, scrubbing away any trace of blood, hair, fibers, anything. And after doing all that, the planning, the abduction, the murder, the disposal, they go home and play a game of cards together before going to bed.
Just unbelievable composure. Or lack of empathy, maybe. The next day, they mail the ransom letter they'd prepared.
Yeah.
But then news breaks. The bodies have been found much sooner than they expected. Even then, they stay calm. They just return the rental car, presumably thinking their intricate plan had worked.
But it didn't. As it often happens, the perfect plan wasn't perfect. There was a mistake, a human element. When the police were examining the scene where the body was found, near that culvert, they found something. A pair of eyeglasses lying on the ground nearby. Not just any drugstore glasses, though. These were distinctive, custom-made horn-rimmed spectacles. Very specific hinge design. Turns out only one optometrist in Chicago, maybe the world at that time, used that particular hinge.
And that tiny detail, that unique hinge, that was the thread that unraveled everything. Police tracked down the optometrist, showed him the glasses. He checked his records. Yeah, he sold only 3 pairs like that. And one belonged to a young man named Nathan Leopold, who had mentioned needing them repaired recently.
The police now had a name connected to the glasses found near the body. They bring Leopold in. He quickly tries to shift blame onto his friend, Richard Loeb. It didn't take long. By May 31st, just 10 days after the murder, both young men had confessed.
And this is the part that truly electrified Chicago in 1924, the reveal. These weren't hardened criminals from the wrong side of the tracks. The killers weren't Morton D. Ballard and Louis Mason. They were Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb, rich kids, from their own exclusive South Kenwood neighborhood, just like Bobby.
Let's break down who they were. Morton, the driver, was Nathan Leopold. 19 years old. And folks, this kid was a certified genius, spoke 5 languages fluently, had already graduated from the University of Chicago, was a published nationally respected ornithologist bird expert. His IQ was apparently so high it was basically off the charts for the tests they had back then. Planning to go to Harvard Law, his father,
Drake.
president of a major steamship company, wealthy.
And Lewis Mason, the cousin, the tennis partner, that was Richard Loeb, even younger, just 18. Also a genius, the youngest person at that time ever to graduate from the University of Michigan. He was only 17 when he graduated, his father. The retired president of Sears, Roebuck and Company. We're talking astronomical wealth. Loeb Sr. was worth maybe $175 million in today's terms. He bought Richard his own custom-built golf course as a graduation present. Richard Loeb was enrolled at the University of Chicago Law School.
So you have these 2 young men, brilliant minds, limitless futures, unimaginable wealth. And that leads us to the motive, which is perhaps the most shocking part of all. When they confessed, like you said, they didn't even bother pretending it was about the $10,000 ransom. That was irrelevant. They killed Bobby Franks based on their own deeply warped interpretation of Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy, specifically the idea of the Übermensch, the Superman.
Right. This is crucial to understanding why this case hit so hard. They genuinely believe their superior intellect put them above ordinary people, above morality, above ethics, above the actual law. They saw themselves as these supermen who had the right, even the duty maybe, to operate outside the rules that govern the rest of us, the herd as they might see it. So the murder wasn't just violence. It was, in their minds, an act of will, an intellectual exercise, a way to prove they could commit the perfect crime and therefore confirm their own transcendence.
And Bobby. Why him? The sources suggest it was partly the challenge. He was known to them, he was family, adding complexity. But also, chillingly, they just saw him as, and I think this is close to a quote, a pretty easy target, someone accessible. The act itself was the point, not necessarily the specific victim, beyond convenience and perhaps that extra layer of transgressive risk because he was Loeb's cousin.
And that sense of entitlement, that massive privilege, it didn't just vanish after they were caught. Even after confessing to this brutal murder, the sources detail how, while they were initially held, a chauffeur was allowed to deliver silk pajamas for them to wear. And they weren't thrown in a standard jail cell at first. They were held in relative comfort in a hotel. It's just staggering.
Ultimately, though, the confessions, the evidence, especially those glasses, was overwhelming. They were both represented by the famous lawyer Clarence Darrow, who argued against the death penalty. They were sentenced to life in prison plus 99 years. Jacob Franks, Bobby's father, died just 4 years later, understandably heartbroken. As for the killers, Richard Loeb was actually murdered by another inmate in prison in 1936. Nathan Leopold served a long time, was eventually paroled in 1958, moved to Puerto Rico, and died of natural causes in 1971.
So why does this case still resonate? Why crime of the century?
I think it's because it completely shattered those comfortable early 20th century assumptions. The idea that terrible crimes, that kind of depravity, was something confined to the poor or the uneducated or the desperate. Leopold and Loeb showed that immense privilege, blinding intelligence, and this kind of philosophical nihilism could combine to create something truly monstrous, calculated, cold.
It's that paradox, isn't it? The extreme wealth, the genius-level intellects all twisted into this philosophical justification for killing a 14-year-old boy, a relative.
Exactly. The contrast is just jarring. So here's something to think about, a final thought as we wrap up this deep dive. Considering their stated motivation, proving their superiority by committing the perfect, intellectually driven crime, which detail really strikes you as revealing the deeper coldness? Is it the months of meticulous, careful planning? The fake names, the hotel room, the bank account, the sheer intellectual effort they put into the mechanics of the deception? Or is it that casual stop for hot dogs and root beers? Moments after the murder, with the boy's body right there in the car, that utterly mundane act in the midst of such horror. Which one feels colder, the intellectual game or the basic human disconnect? Something to mull over.